Nietzsche brings up two fundamental natures in man, creature and creator. He essentially talks about that one must be a creative force in the world if one is to lead a life-affirming life. This is the view of the life that will be happy and better as opposed to the life-denying one of the herd. There's a part of the text that says, in man, creature and creator are united. In man there is matter, fragment, excess, clay, mud, madness, chaos. But in man there is also creator, sculptor, the hardness of the hammer, the divine spectator, and the seventh day. So what he's talking about is this idea of if we take our suffering and we magnify it and we harness it for this creative purpose, this is the essential part, or a essential part, of leading a good life, and an essential part of this life affirmation that he wants to advocate for. However, it requires a strong-willed person to do this, and this is largely because of what we're about to read about how the herds pity the creature. So, looking at these two fundamental natures, creature, creator, creature is the stuff we are made out of. It is this stuff which suffers in the process of making and refining. So this will be the elements that are being challenged, that are having to change, adapt, to be flexible. They're under great pressure. They are suffering. This is the elements of oneself that are being affected by the suffering. The herd class pities the creature. They look around at the creatures of the herd and see that they are suffering and pity them for this. In part, this arises from a fear that they too can suffer if someone like them has. Again, comes back to that idea of it's not love thy neighbor, it's fear thy neighbor, which is the basis of this morality. So it's fear not only of what their neighbor might do to us, but fear of our neighbor as an example of what might happen to us. This again comes under this fearing of suffering that this part of us must undergo, and again leads to their rejection of suffering and seeking to abolish it, essentially at all costs. Whereas for the creator, and this is the important part of where it can be utilizing this suffering in a positive way, Nietzsche takes that the creator part is essentially the superior part of us. The creator needs suffering as a tool with which it can refine the materials of the creature. So only through this creator element is the creature and us as a person overall able to utilize this suffering and harness it to live a good life and aid those of which who are experiencing the suffering. So creature is the stuff, creator is the one using the stuff, using it as a tool to better themselves. There is a second part to this idea from 225, which is about this idea of pity that is important to talk about. So, when we talk about pity in terms of Nietzsche and the noble or superior thinking about this idea of pity, it is different to pity that the herd would feel. The difference is that the herd would feel pity for, say, like the sick or the unfortunate. Pity for the noble is instead towards the way in which the herd's pity diminishes the herd, brings it down. Because the herd sees things like suffering of others as something to pity one for, because they themselves are afraid of such suffering. The herd wants to remove it and replace it with well-being. The pity of the strong for the weak is laced with a kind of disdain, because the weak in some sense represent failed human beings. For Nietzsche, there are higher problems than pleasure, pain, and pity, and philosophies that treat these as the highest are at best naive. the major issue is that Nietzsche thinks that the herds want to abolish suffering is a mistake, and it's going to cause the herd and the society to be worse off. So they pity them, knowing that they would never be able to make the world better, or help themselves. It's a negative form of it. It's like the wording their disdain as well and derision. It's looking at it very, very negatively and as though they are better than them, not a feeling bad for them. 228. So this is section 228. English moral tartuffery, which this word just means hypocrisy. It's used in the text, hence why used here. In this section, like with 225, he begins with criticizing the moral systems of the time. However, in this way, he describes them as boring and soporific, and what that means is sleep inducing. However, he states that there is some usefulness, and this usefulness, and the only way that they in which are good, comes from the fact that they are this boring sleep inducing, and it stops the herd from thinking about morality, and this is good because it's not their place to think about these things. Something to note here is that Nietzsche doesn't have this view that if we were to educate the herd in these philosophical ideas, that we'd be able to bring and drag all of the herd up to be masters. The herd has this innate need to obey, whereas masters are more self-actualized and able to rise up, be ambitious, be self-ordered and contained and able to push oneself. This is not something that simple education will allow the herd to embody. So he doesn't think that if they were educated that they'd be able to be brought up to master status. In the next part of this section, he does pretty particularly dismiss utilitarianist ideas, where it talks directly about one morality for all humans because this must mean that all are brought down to the lowest common denominator. He thinks that if we have one morality that's meant to be for everybody, this would have to be pitching to the low because otherwise it's unattainable for those that are in that lower level. In contrast, he believes in order of rank between man and man, and that there is a hierarchy between men. And just as there is this hierarchy between morality as well, and this idea of one morality for all is detrimental precisely to the higher men. And this again is because he thinks it's pitching to the lowest common denominator. If we're pitching to the low, then it doesn't allow those who are higher to meet their full potential, and they would have to push themselves down or quell any of their ambition or drive just so that they can meet this low level expectation. That's pretty much it for 228. It's not the longest section, but it brings up some interesting ideas about what Nietzsche thinks. I think there is one part that ends it off actually, where he just says about the mediocrity over prevailing moral philosophies, so the issues and shortcomings of each, is not something to be discouraged by, because that as well might mean that people begin thinking about it. He doesn't want this group, this community to think about it's not for them or up to them to indulge or change or think about morality. That is for, again, the noble, the higher. All right, on to 260, and this is a very important section because it brings in our master and slave moralities. So the table that you can see here is essentially just there as a quick summary rundown of these two ideas and the foundation essentially of them and how they apply to Nietzsche's text. So masters are what he brings out as these noble men, this higher people who are outside of morals and simply better. So you'll see there it says amoral. They don't have their own morality. It's more of, when we're talking about master morality, we're talking about how they view morality versus them living based on rules of morality. So master morality, or the master's viewpoint, arises out of saying yes to itself. Noblemen are outside of morals, they simply are. If we consider morality about choices, for the nobleman, it isn't a choice, it simply arises out of simply saying yes to what you feel. So the example here is like cake. It's like if a nobleman was like came out, like walked up and saw this piece of cake, they wouldn't ask themselves, should I eat this, should I not eat this? He either eats it because he wants to, or he doesn't eat it because he doesn't want to. It's beyond morality. It's simply a yes or no feeling. It's not, is this good, is this bad? It's a, I want it, that's a yes. I don't want it, that's a no. The contrast to this is slave morality, or herd man morality. This is where it essentially comes from. Slave morality says no on principle to everything that is outside or other or non-self, something that is not part of this community. It requires a oppressing relationship. Slave morality first has to have an opposing external worldview. It is basically a reaction. So when we talked about this idea of fear being the factor for the herd, this is where that comes in. It has to have something to fear, something that is opposing it, something that is causing an issue with which they want to avoid. We said in one of the previous sections about the values that they uphold are those that are in contrast to the noble, to the masters. And we'll see that again when we talk about it in a moment. So the example given in this part is doing what noble people want goes against the majority. The slave revolt is opposing what is happening from others. So opposing anything that goes on that affects negatively the community or changes the community in any way. Right. So there is a important note at the start of this section where Nietzsche does actually say that it's possible for, in an individual soul, the existence of both master and slave moralities. And it does, in fact, bring up an interesting point where you can see his concern is less about the social structures and more about individual context. So especially master morality is very individualistic. It doesn't have to be a part of society, essentially, to be happy or to live a good life. So again, master morality. Way in which masters understand good or bad, even though they are above this. So like we said, they're amoral. It's not about, what is good or bad, right or wrong. It is simply how they understand these concepts versus making choices as aligned with them. For the masters, there are things which are noble, and this would be equated with good things, or things that are despicable, and again, these would be equated with bad things. Rather than thinking about things in moral terms of good and bad, they don't use labels like evil either. They instead talk about things as being noble or being despicable. So noble things are like strength, despicable things like cowardice. Where these moral ideas come from of something being noble or something being despicable, they're made up about people. It originally comes down to you're seeing the actions come from a power position. So choices based on wants over any sort of moral obligation would look at the world and determine values based on what harms me or my honor is harmful in itself. And they would see the individual who inspires fear or wants to inspire it as the good man. Masters, for example, can be compassionate, but won't be because of pity, but from knowledge of the abundance of power that they have, and so helping because they can, and it is self-glorifying, just doing what they want. So even that idea of like if they don't do it, that's okay as well, because it's their prerogative to decide or not. If they want to do it, it's the right thing to do. If they do not want to do it, it's not the right thing to do. It links also to this idea of only having duty to one's equals, and one can act as one pleases towards those of other ranks. So, whilst it doesn't imply they have to be, you know, negative or rude towards those lower than them, it is not bad of them, or we can't look at it negatively if they were to decide to do those kinds of things to someone of a lower rank. They have no obligation to them, no duty. Something to consider with this idea is a comparison to Plato. When we think of this man of power, this master we discuss, something to make sure that you don't do is don't confuse it with Callicles' views of the elite. It doesn't mean that you are taking whatever you please just because you can. It means you can act as you wish. It might mean you act charitable by just doing what you want. If you don't help, again, so be it. That's also the right way to act. There is a little bit of similarity, however, in fact to Socrates' viewpoints about rulers ruling themselves and having self-discipline, as it is through practicing power over oneself that one brings on development and improvement. So it's going to have an E. Yeah. So don't confuse with Callicles' elite ideas that you are simply going to take whatever you can in this unsatiable fulfilling of desires. Instead, it is simply that you're able to act as you wish, and that could be doing the right thing or doing the wrong thing. And either way, that is doing a good thing or doing a termed bad thing. And either way, that is the right way to act, as it is their desire to do so. The continued is the slave morality side of this. So, slave morality is essentially the morality of utility, that which helps society is the good thing. The slave defines what is good as what is opposite to the masters, as they're the opposite side to this is slave morality. And slave morality is essentially one of utility, of usefulness, of contribution to society. And where this idea of good comes from is they define what is good as what is opposite to the masters, as they are suspicious of that which the masters uphold as good, almost questioning the reality of if they are actually happy or not. Here it is where the famous good and evil is sourced. This is terminology used in slave morality, where good is what is helps the herd or the community group. Evil is what affects it in a bad, negative way. They advocate for the ideal person as one who is harmless and incapable of generating suffering for others. They are good natured, they're easy to deceive, perhaps a bit stupid. This shows that they are moldable, they are able to be utilized for the community versus strong, dominating, and trying to take away from the herd. This then means that the strong is designated as evil in a very reactionary way. I'll leave that for now. Again, talking about it, praises quality like pity, kindness, helping, warm-heartedness, patience, sincerity, humility, friendliness as positive ones. Slave morality's purpose is to ease the suffering of the weak and console them about their feeble existence. This should be up here. What this then does is show a very key and clear difference between the two moralities when we look at them now, having seen both. is that according to slave morality, the evil inspire fear, whereas according to master morality, it is precisely the good who inspire fear and want to inspire it, while the bad man is judged contemptible. So the most obvious and straightaway difference that you can see between these two groups is that their idea of who is good and who is evil is almost opposite. So the evil are those who inspire fear for the slave morality. For master morality, the good is those that inspire fear and want to inspire it. So keep that in mind. This brings us to our final section where we talk about the 4 virtues. And this is discussing essentially Nietzsche's views of the good life and what is required to live this good life. So, what it might be to be a Nietzschean, their ideals and the ethics being expressed here. So, to live a good life implies that one must know thyself. They must be aware of who they are, of their emotions, their dispositions, their strengths, their weaknesses, because living a good life is about improvement, self fulfillment, and self mastery. Essentially, you have to have an awareness of your flaws so that you can work on them and alleviate some of those weaknesses. And you have to know your strengths so you can enhance and you can act on and you can utilize these fully. So, what he takes to be the noble virtues and that which emphasizes good actions essentially are these 4 virtues. So he labels courage, and this is strength, ability to overcome and aim to improve in light of suffering. He talks about insight, insight into your true nature. It's not about cleverness, it is about having that understanding of who you are, again, about knowing thyself, so that you can improve, get better, and live your life to the fullest. Then we have sympathy. So it's a little bit different of how Nietzsche understands sympathy to sometimes how we talk about it today. So when we see this virtue, we have to think about it as something that is arising out of understanding. So understanding of one's equal, we feel empathy. We feel for them. We understand the issues and struggles that they're going through as they are our equal and we are also going through and living these ideas. We feel for the suffering that they go through, not in a negative way, but we just understand that it is hard and that it is something that we are working towards. It's something, again, to be admired. You want suffering, it will help improve you, but we understand and we empathize that it is a hard road to get to improvement. For sympathy, for the less fortunate, is the other side of this. This sympathy isn't about, again, they're the unfortunate, they're sick or ill. It's about understanding that they will never get to where these noblemen are. It's sympathy for the fact that they are unable to meet their fullest potential. It's not looking down on them with pity, as the master morality would. It is instead sympathy simply because, well, we feel for the fact they would never be able to reach that potential, but we don't pity because pity is negative. So a virtue is sympathy over pity. Then there is solitude. And this is something that is important because it keeps one above the contamination of society. Having solitude brings us back to those ideas, about not having to be involved in society to live a good life, to live well. For solitude, it's not about becoming the ruler or taking over. It is the second line where it says it's concerned with development and improvement of oneself. So self mastery, bringing again back those ideas of strengths and weaknesses, knowing yourself, knowing how or what you need to work on, knowing your strengths and how to, again, enhance those, how to utilize them well. And that's the end of Nietzsche. Yeah, really brings up ideas of these four virtues as they are what it is to live with tremendous and proud self possession and beyond simply that of the herd.